Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks. Dismissed.
It was a TV juggernaut, a cultural touchstone that somehow did the impossible. For 11 seasons, MASH managed to balance the heartbreaking tragedy of war with the sharp, cynical humor of the people forced to live through it. Week after week, millions didn't just watch the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, they felt like they lived there, forging real bonds with the doctors and nurses who started to feel like family. The show wasn't just popular, it was an event, a series that completely changed what a sitcom could be, but behind all the laughter and camaraderie, a very different story was playing out. While fans were laughing and crying on their couches, backstage, things weren't always so smooth. Ambition, creative frustration, and the sheer emotional toll of the series started to build up. And one by one, beloved actors began to walk away, making shocking exits from one of the most successful shows in TV history. So why would anyone walk away from a guaranteed hit, a cultural phenomenon at the very peak of its power? The answers are complicated, involving huge career-changing deals, deep-seated creative frustrations, and backstage drama that led to some of the most unforgettable and gut-wrenching moments in television history. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the real reasons these stars left MAS and why, for some, it was a decision that would follow them for the rest of their lives. To really get the weight of these departures, you have to understand the world these actors were leaving. MASH wasn't just another show on TV. It was a cultural force that started long before it ever hit the airwaves. It all began with the 1968 novel MASH, a novel about 3 Army doctors, written by Richard Hooker, which was the pen name for a real-life military surgeon named Dr. H. Richard Hornberger. The book, based on his own time in the Korean War, was a raw, darkly funny look at life in a mobile army surgical hospital. That book was then famously turned into a critically acclaimed 1970 movie by the legendary director Robert Altman. The film was a smash hit, perfectly capturing the anti-establishment vibe of the era and setting the chaotic, irreverent tone the franchise became known for. So, when CBS decided to adapt it for TV in 1972, a lot of people were skeptical. How could a network sitcom ever capture the gritty, R-rated spirit of the film while following the strict broadcast rules of the time? The answer came down to the show's brilliant creators, Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds. They knew the heart of MASH wasn't just the pranks and martinis, it was the raw humanity of its characters, stuck in the middle of the inhumanity of war. The show premiered while the Vietnam War was still going on, and even though it was set in Korea, it became a powerful and poignant commentary on that conflict. It was a show that could make you howl with laughter 1 minute and then completely break your heart the next, sometimes in the very same scene. This unique mix of comedy and drama was revolutionary. The series didn't just entertain, it made audiences face the realities of war in a way no TV show had ever done before. As the seasons went on, the show leaned even more into its dramatic side, exploring heavy themes like PTSD, the ethics of war, and the deep personal cost of it all. This shift was guided in large part by its star, Alan Alda, who became a major creative force behind the scenes, writing and directing many episodes and pushing for a more realistic and emotionally honest tone. The show's popularity was just staggering. It was a ratings beast for its entire 11-season run. The series finale, Goodbye, Farewell and Amen, which aired on February 28, 1983, is still one of the most watched television broadcasts in American history, a true testament to the deep connection people felt with these characters, but all that success came with a price. The production schedule was brutal, the emotional weight of the material was immense, and the cast's growing fame created a total pressure cooker environment. And as Alan Alda's influence grew and his character, Hawkeye Pierce, became the undeniable center of the show, other actors started to feel pushed to the side and creatively stifled. It was this perfect storm of fame, frustration, and ambition that led to the first, and maybe the most shocking, departure from the 4077th. When MASH first aired, McLean Stevenson's Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake was the lovable, bumbling heart of the command. He was the guy who'd much rather be playing golf than fighting a war, an authority figure who often seemed just as lost as the man he was supposed to be leading. Stevenson brought a warmth and easy charm to the role that made Henry Blake an instant fan favorite. He was the perfect, gentle counterpoint to the chaotic energy of Hawkeye and Trapper. But behind the scenes, as the show's popularity exploded, Stevenson started to get restless. He was a talented and ambitious guy, and he began to feel like his role was getting smaller. He'd been a successful writer and was a frequent guest host for Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show, and he really wanted to be the star, not just one part of a big, successful cast. He saw Alan Alda's Hawkeye becoming the show's focal point and felt like he was being left in the dust. In one interview, he admitted, "I know I will not be in anything as good as this show, but I have to leave and be number one." That ambition didn't go unnoticed. NBC saw a chance to poach a big star from a rival network's hit. They offered Stevenson a massive multi-year contract that was just too good to refuse. The deal promised him a way bigger salary and, most importantly, his very own show. There were even rumors that NBC was thinking of him as a potential replacement for Johnny Carson if he ever decided to retire. For an actor dying to be the main event, it was a dream come true. He made the fateful call to leave MASH at the end of its third season. The writers and producers were left with a huge problem. How do you write out a character that beloved? They could have just had him transferred or sent home with an honorable discharge. But they decided to do something that had never been done before, something that would change the rules of television forever. They wanted Henry's departure to reflect the core theme of the show, that war is random, senseless, and cruel. They decided that Henry Blake would go home, but he wasn't going to make it. The season 3 finale, Abyssinia, Henry, is a masterclass in emotional misdirection. The whole episode is full of heartfelt goodbyes as the entire camp comes out to see their commander off. There are tears, hugs, and a final shot of Henry's helicopter flying away, leaving everyone with a sense of bittersweet closure. But the story wasn't over. In an incredible move of secrecy, the writers wrote one last, devastating scene. That single page of the script was delivered to the set just moments before they filmed it, and only a handful of people knew what was on it. The scene takes place in the OR, where the surgeons are working. A quiet, shell-shocked Radar O'Reilly, played by Gary Burghoff, walks in. He gets everyone's attention and delivers the news, his voice cracking. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. It spun in. There were no survivors. The shock you see on the actors' faces was real. Their stunned reactions weren't acting, they were genuine expressions of disbelief and pain. The producers had captured lightning in a bottle, a raw, unfiltered moment of grief that blurred the line between fiction and reality. When it aired in 1975, the audience was completely devastated. The network was flooded with angry calls and letters from viewers who felt betrayed. But that moment cemented MASH's legacy as a show that wasn't afraid to take huge risks and tell hard truths. For McLean Stevenson, though, the gamble was a total disaster. His new variety show was a ratings flop and got cancelled almost immediately. His next sitcom, Hello, Larry, became a legendary failure, a punchline for TV critics for years. He quickly realized the massive mistake he'd made. In a brutally honest moment years later, he said, "I made the mistake of believing that people were enamored of McLean Stevenson, when the person they were enamored with was Henry Blake." Audiences had fallen for the character, not necessarily the actor. Without the brilliant writing and perfect ensemble of MASH, Stevenson just couldn't find his footing. He spent the rest of his career doing guest spots and minor projects, never again reaching the level of fame he had so casually walked away from. Friends reported he grew bitter about the choice, often making self-deprecating jokes about the decision that defined his career. The death of Henry Blake was a tragedy for the 4077th, but for McLean Stevenson, leaving the show was a professional blow from which He never truly recovered. At the very same time McLean Stevenson was planning his exit, another key member of the original cast was getting just as fed up. Wayne Rogers, who played the charismatic and rebellious Captain Trapper John McIntyre, was Hawkeye's original partner in crime. In those early seasons, their chemistry was the engine that powered the show. They were two sides of the same coin, a wisecracking duo whose friendship was their shield against the madness around them. When Rogers signed on, he believed he and Alan Alda would be co-leads. Hawkeye and Trapper were supposed to have equal footing, sharing the best storylines and the sharpest lines. Rogers, a sharp Princeton grad, even worked with Alda to make sure their characters were distinct, not just some generic double act. But as the show took off, it became painfully clear that Alan Alda's Hawkeye was the breakout star. Audiences adored him, and the writers, seeing this, started funneling all the best dramatic and comedic material his way. Slowly but surely, Trapper John went from being a co-lead to a sidekick. He was the guy Hawkeye bounced jokes off of, his accomplice in pranks, but he was rarely at the center of the story. For Rogers, this was incredibly frustrating. He felt his character was being sidelined and wasn't being developed, which went against the original promise made to him. He was a smart performer who wanted to contribute to a character with some real depth. Feeling marginalized and creatively stuck, he decided he was done with the 4077th. His departure, though, was way more heated and legally messy than Stevenson's. When he told the producers he was quitting right before season 4 started, they were furious and immediately threatened to sue him for breach of contract. They thought they had him locked in and were ready for a legal battle. But Wayne Rogers had an ace up his sleeve. It turned out that Rogers had never actually signed his contract. Years earlier, when he first got the document, he had a problem with a morals clause it contained. The clause was super vague and basically gave the studio the right to fire him for any behavior they considered immoral, a power Rogers was not willing to give them. So, instead of fighting it, he just never signed it. And in the chaos of getting a new show on the air, the studio's legal team completely missed it. This meant the producers had no legal ground to stand on. There was no contract to break. Wayne Rogers was free to go, and he did, without so much as an on-screen goodbye. The writers had to scramble. Unlike Henry Blake's dramatic send-off, Trapper John's exit was explained away in a single line at the start of season 4. He'd been honorably discharged and sent home while Hawkeye was on R&R. For fans, his sudden disappearance was jarring. There was no final prank, no emotional farewell, no closure at all for one of the show's founding characters. One episode. He was there, the next he was just gone. To fill the void, the show brought in a new character, Captain B.J. Honeycutt, played by Mike Farrell. B.J. was designed to be a totally different kind of friend for Hawkeye. He was a devoted family man, more down-to-earth, and way less of a womanizer than Trapper. This new dynamic changed the show in a fundamental way, pushing it from a buddy comedy toward something more thoughtful and emotionally deep. Many people argue this shift actually made MAS better in the long run, but at the time, losing Trapper was a huge blow. Years later, the show's enduring popularity led to a spin-off, Trapper John, M.D., following the character's life after the war. In a final, telling move, the studio didn't even offer the role to Wayne Rogers. They recast it with actor Pernell Roberts, basically erasing Rogers from the character's legacy. Unlike McLean Stevenson, though, Wayne Rogers didn't just fade away. While his acting career was mostly guest roles and a decent run on the sitcom House Calls, his biggest success after MAS was in a completely different world. That same sharp, analytical mind that led him to question his contract also made him a brilliant financial investor. He started his own successful investment company and became a respected financial expert, even appearing regularly on a Fox News show. While he never publicly expressed the same kind of deep regret as Stevenson, his unceremonious exit is a powerful example of an actor who just refused to be second fiddle, choosing his professional integrity over a supporting role on a hit show. every great hero needs a great villain, and for the first 5 seasons of MAS that villain was Major Frank "Ferret Face" Burns. Played to absolute perfection by Larry Linville, Frank Burns was the ultimate antagonist. He was petty, incompetent, hypocritical, and a suck-up. The perfect comedic and ideological punching bag for Hawkeye and Trapper. His secret affair with Major Margaret "Hot Lips" Houlihan, even though he was married, just added a layer of hypocrisy that audiences loved to hate. Linville, who took over the role from Robert Duvall in the film, completely made the character his own, turning him into one of TV's most memorable and delightfully awful figures. He was the stick in the mud, the living embodiment of everything our heroes were fighting against. For 5 years, Linville was brilliant as this buffoon, but as the show started to change, he began to feel trapped. The main reason Larry Linville left was simple creative and professional exhaustion. As MASH shifted its tone from a straight sitcom to a more dramatic dramedy, the character of Frank Burns started to feel out of place. He was a one-dimensional cartoon in a show that was now digging into three-dimensional characters and complex emotions. While other characters were allowed to grow, evolve, and show hidden depths, Frank Burns just stayed the same, comically awful. There were tiny glimmers of humanity, but they were few and far between. Linville felt he had taken the character as far as he possibly could. After 5 seasons of playing the same notes of arrogance and incompetence over and over, he believed there was nothing left for him to explore. When his 5-year contract was up for renewal, the producers offered him a 2-year extension. Linville said no. He was tired of just being Frank Burns and wanted to avoid being typecast for the rest of his life. He was hungry for more varied and challenging roles that would let him show his range as an actor. Unlike the exits of Stevenson and Rogers, Linville's departure was reportedly pretty friendly. There was no bad blood or contract fight, it was just a mutual understanding that the character had run his course. The writers seemed to agree. In the season 6 premiere, Frank's exit is handled quickly. After Margaret Houlihan gets married to someone else, Frank has a complete mental breakdown in Tokyo, gets promoted to lieutenant colonel, and is unceremoniously transferred to a VA hospital back home in Indiana. The members of the 4077th are, to put it lightly, not sad to see him go. In his place came Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, played by David Ogden Stiers. Winchester was a whole different kind of antagonist. He was a genuinely brilliant surgeon from a rich Boston family, and while he was arrogant and snobby, he was also a true intellectual and professional match for Hawkeye. This new dynamic allowed for much more nuanced and complex stories than Frank Burns ever could have. It was a change that, just like adding B.J. Honeycutt, ultimately made the series even better. After leaving MASH, Larry Linville found that escaping Frank Burns's shadow was a lot harder than he thought. His career after the show was mostly guest spots on popular shows at the time, like The Love Boat and Fantasy Island, and a few minor movie roles. He never found another role that brought him anywhere near the same level of fame. While he left the show for admirable artistic reasons, his story is another cautionary tale about the risks of walking away from a cultural phenomenon. He had successfully avoided being typecast as Frank Burns, but in doing so, he struggled to get cast as anything else of real significance. Out of all the actors who left the 4077th, maybe none was more beloved than Gary Berghoff. His character, Corporal Walter "Radar" O'Reilly, was the innocent, naive soul of the unit. He was the only principal cast member from the TV show to have also been in the Robert Altman movie, and he'd been playing the role for nearly a decade by the time he decided to leave. Radar, with his teddy bear, his grape Nehi sodas, and his almost psychic ability to know what his commanding officer wanted before they did, was the audience's stand-in, the gentle kid caught in the crossfire. Berghoff's performance was celebrated, earning him 6 Emmy nominations and a win in 1977. But underneath the surface of this beloved character, the actor himself was really struggling. The main reason for his departure was simple but profound: burnout. The brutal production schedule of a weekly TV show took a huge toll. But for Berghoff, the weight was doubled. He wasn't just working long hours, he was channeling a character whose whole identity was based on a kind of wide-eyed innocence, an emotional state that got harder and harder to maintain that he was a man in his 30s playing a character who was forever 19. That disconnect started to wear on him. He also felt the crushing pressure of audience expectations. In one interview, he said, "Audiences think you have to be the person they see on screen. The truth is, Radar was a better person than I'll ever be, and trying to live up to him was hard." This blurring of his own identity with his characters was a heavy burden. "For 7 years," he wrote, "no new person in my life called me Gary. Only Radar." This professional burnout was made worse by personal struggles. Berghoff was dealing with his own anxiety and depression, and the intense work schedule left almost no time for his family. He was married with a young daughter and deeply regretted all the time he was missing with them. He felt like he was giving everything he had to the show, with nothing left for the people who mattered most. There were also reports of some contract disputes over pay, which just added more stress to an already tough situation. By the end of season 7, Berghoff knew he had to get out. Unlike the abrupt exits of his former co-stars, the cast and crew had time to prepare for Radar's departure. The producers, respecting his incredible contribution to the show, gave him a poignant, 2-part farewell episode in season 8 called "Goodbye, Radar." The episodes are incredibly emotional, showing Radar getting a hardship discharge to go home to his family farm in Iowa. The scenes of him saying goodbye to the people he'd come to love are some of the most touching in the entire series. The filming itself was heavy, with Berghoff reportedly breaking down in tears during one scene, the line between the character's farewell and the actor's own completely blurring. After leaving MASH, Gary Berghoff mostly stepped out of the spotlight. He made a few brief appearances in the short-lived spin-off After MASH and a pilot for another spin-off called WA'L''T''E''R', but his heart just wasn't in Hollywood anymore. He focused on his family, his passion for painting wildlife, and he even became an inventor. His career after the show was modest, mostly game show appearances and a few guest roles. But for Berghoff, leaving wasn't about finding more fame or a better part. It was about self-preservation. It was a choice he had to make to protect his mental health and put his family first, a decision born not from ambition, but from a deep need to just be Gary again. While the departures of Stevenson, Rogers, Linville, and Berghoff were the most significant, they weren't the only cast changes over the show's long run. In the very first season, another character quietly vanished. Timothy Brown played Captain Oliver "Spearchucker" Jones, a neurosurgeon who was also a great athlete. He was in the first few episodes, but the character was dropped. The commonly cited reason is that producers learned there were no black surgeons in the real MASH units during the Korean War. However, the historical accuracy of that claim has been debated, and some also suggest the writers just had a hard time coming up with storylines for him. In the end, for the sake of what they believed to be historical accuracy, the character was written out. Another early change involved the beloved camp chaplain, Father Mulcahy. In the pilot episode, the role was played by an actor named George Morgan. But the producers didn't feel his performance was quite right for the tone they were going for. They wanted someone with a quirkier personality. After the pilot, the role was recast with William Christopher, who would play the gentle, unassuming priest for the rest of the series and its spin-off, After MASH. And while Gary Berghoff was the only principal cast member in both the film and the show, it's a fun fact that actor G. Wood played General Hammond in both versions as well. These early changes show how much the show was constantly evolving. But it's also worth noting the story of a major actor who joined late and stayed right until the end. David Ogden Stiers, who came in during season 6 as the incredible Major Winchester, became a vital part of the show's later, more dramatic years. Yet, when MAS finally ended and he was offered the chance to join some of his castmates in the spin-off After MASH, Stiers flatly refused. He felt the story had been told, the journey was over, and he was ready to move on. His decision is a great contrast to the others. A reminder that sometimes, leaving isn't about frustration or ambition, but about knowing when a story has reached its perfect conclusion. The story of the actors who left MAS is a complicated mix of ambition, creative frustration, personal struggle, and, for some, deep regret. For McLean Stevenson, it was a gamble for stardom that backfired in a spectacular way, a painful lesson in the difference between a character's popularity and an actor's. For Wayne Rogers, it was a stand on principle against being made a sidekick, a fight for the creative respect he felt he deserved. For Larry Linville, it was an artist trying to escape the box of a one-dimensional character, a search for new challenges that turned out to be harder than he thought. And for Gary Berghoff, it was a deeply personal choice to step away from the burnout and identity crisis that came with playing a beloved icon for a decade. Each one of these departures sent shockwaves through the series, forcing